Today's topic, how negative self-talk affects us, um, I think is really important, right? I talk about the inner mean girl, and the things that we say to ourselves matter. Words matter. And we tend to be our own worst critic. And so that negative self-talk is prevalent. It can really keep us playing small. And so today I wanted to talk about some of the other effects of negative self-talk. And then towards the end, I'll give you some ideas of ways that you can challenge her or quiet the inner mean girl, as I like to say, because we want to play bigger, right? We want to not have our self-doubts hold us back. And so there's no way to completely shut her up. There isn't, right? We have this negativity bias where it keeps us safe, it keeps us comfortable, and it keeps us alive, right? And so there's no way to shut her up completely. There's always going to be new challenges in life. There's going to be new things that you come across or like that you come to in your journey. And so every time that happens, we want to build your confidence, but that inner mean girl or that self-talk, it's going to keep coming up, but I'm going to teach you ways to be able to shut her down a lot quicker, right? I say her, the inner mean girl. There's self-critical talk, the self-criticism that you may tend to do. So what is negative thinking, or what is negative self-talk? It's those negative thoughts. Again, it's a common part of the human experience. It's not something that we can completely get rid of, but it's very common. But when you have excessive or persistent negative thinking or negative self-talk, it can be a symptom of a deeper mental health issue. Like I said, we have this negativity bias. It's a psychological phenomenon where people tend to give more attention and weight to negative information and experiences compared to positive one, right? Because like I said, it keeps us safe. If we're being chased by, to bring it back to like evolution, back in the caveman days, we want to be aware of our surroundings. We're constantly thinking of the threats that are like what's posing a threat to our survival. And so that's a good thing, right? But as we've come to modern times, there's things that we continue to feel stress about, because I'm actually doing an entire stress workshop here in a couple of weeks. Actually, it's next week, but it's all about stress because we have this proclivity, or like we have this focus on the negative things because it's kept us alive, and we continue to do it to this day. It's evolved as a survival mechanism where paying more attention to the potential threats or the dangers in the environment, it was essential for early human survival, and it continues to be essential for our survival. The threats are just different, right? We don't have saber-toothed tigers chasing us these days, but we have traffic, right? And we have deadlines, and we have these things that provide, like, give us, like, put pressure on us. And so the negative self-talk, it keeps us, I wouldn't say it keeps us moving forward, but it definitely does help us survive. And so we want to learn how to quiet that inner mean girl talk and that self-talk so that we can surpass that, to overcome and continue doing what we want to be doing, right? Living our dreams. And so there's certain triggers that you may have noticed that inner mean girl is even louder, right? Where we talk to ourselves even more negatively. Stress. I mentioned, the pressure of deadlines and traffic. When we are under pressure, we may interpret those situations more negatively, or we may even catastrophize those potential outcomes. Have you ever said, what if, right? Like the worst case scenario, that's usually what our minds go to. But I want you to challenge that, right? We'll get into that. But what can you be speaking? When we are challenging that negative self-talk, we're introducing self-compassion and kindness. We're learning to talk to ourselves like we would a dear friend, and learning to be our biggest cheerleader rather than our worst critic. But when you feel stressed, you may tend to go to that worst case scenario. And what if I don't do it? What if I don't get that thing in time? What if what happens if I can never think of examples under pressure, but like what happens if the worst thing happens, you kind of go down that rabbit hole. And so that tends to happen when you're feeling more stress. Past trauma can be a trigger for those negative self-talk, for the negative self-talk. Experience of trauma or past negative events can lead to intrusive negative thinking. Traumatic memories can resurface and trigger negative thinking patterns. Relationship issues, when you're feeling conflict or you're having difficulty in your relationships, whether with partners, with parents, family members or friends, this can trigger a lot of negative thoughts, not just about yourself, but also others. So being aware that if you're having relationship issues, you need to get a handle on these negative thoughts, which is another reason why it's important to learn how to challenge the negative or the inner mean girl. Socially comparing yourself right here, right? Like Instagram, Facebook, TikToks, like even if it's unconsciously comparing yourself with others, you can, it may trigger a lot of negative thoughts, thinking, maybe feelings of jealousy or feelings of not enough. It could trigger some insecurities about yourself, about not being enough. And it's important to be aware of that and seeing like, how is this affecting me? Am I feeling like less than after I start watching, Instagram Reels, for instance? And how can you separate yourself from that? Because it can really trigger those feelings of inadequacy and a negative self-perception. Perfectionism. Setting unrealistically high standards for yourself and then not meeting them can lead to self-criticism and negative thinking. So being aware of if you're struggling with perfectionism, and it may not be that obvious to you, but taking that step back and seeing like, are my expectations too high, right? I've done lots of Facebook Lives and our challenge, I've talked about it, is that idea of a good mom. And like, what is your definition? And if you're setting these like super high, like that you have to do it all, you have to be it all, you have to take care of everyone and everything, and, kind of have that control, then it's unrealistic to expect yourself to do that. But yet you hold yourself to this high ideal, and then you end up feeling inadequate. Like you feel like, you're not measuring up to those expectations that you're making. And it can really, like, self-talk can really lean towards that negative thing, like you're not good enough. Isolation and loneliness. Feeling isolated or lonely can lead to can lead to negative thoughts about one's social worth and belonging. It's important we grow like by being in a community, by being with other people. And if you're feeling that loneliness, it can really perpetuate the negative thought cycles. And then low self-esteem. If you have low self-esteem, you're more prone to negative thinking about yourself and your abilities. So maybe doing some work on fostering and building your self-esteem can help to reduce the negative thoughts that you're having. So how does negative self-talk, if you have any questions about that, let me know in the comment section. Let me know, #replay if you're watching the replay. If you're watching live, let me know, do you struggle with any of those? Do you struggle with like perfectionism or, stress? Have you noticed that when any of these are happening, that you tend to have more negative thoughts? What are the negative thoughts that you've been having? Right? Like, is it that you're not good enough? Is it that you're failing as like a mom or in your profession? Like, be honest, like take an honest look at what is going on. If you don't feel comfortable saying it in the comments, I get it, right? But like, let me know if any of these triggers, if you've noticed that any of these, when these triggers happen, if you tend to have more negative thoughts. Healthy thinking does not mean avoiding all negative thoughts or emotions. It's totally natural to have negative thoughts from time to time, right? The key is how you respond to them. Right? That you don't let them drag on, or you don't ruminate, or that you don't go down that rabbit hole, or, the thought cycle. You want to, like a spiral, I meant. You want to be more proactive and identify what are those thoughts, and then work through the process to actually challenge them and reframe them in a healthier way. Negative thinking can come across as like that pessimistic perspective, like nothing's ever going to go right. Um, Things are always going to be bad. Self-criticism, self-blame, like blaming yourself when you back up, like you see, like, you know what, there's other factors in play here. I'm not the only one to blame, or I'm not to blame here. But, when you fall into that pattern of constantly self-blaming, that's when it's time to step back and take a look at like what's going on here. Catastrophizing, that worst case scenario, constantly going to that, the what ifs, ruminating, all or nothing thinking. Things are all the time, things are always terrible. I never do, nothing good ever happens to me. A lot of that all or nothing thinking and not looking at the gray area. And then there's self-doubts, I'm not going to be able to do it. I can't do this. Like maybe you're thinking of starting a business and you're like, all of those self-doubts, everyone's already doing it. I'm, not going to be good enough. Those can, really cause a problem and keep you playing small. Now, so healthy thinking would be just that opposite, having a realistic perspective. Sure, let's go back to that starting a business thing. Like, sure, it's going to be hard, but knowing that you can figure it out, right? Not letting that worst case scenario hold you back and saying, well, what's the worst that could happen? And letting that play to the end, and then what? And then what? And then what? And then ultimately knowing that you're going to be okay. One of the things let me just do a little side note here. One of the things that happens when we do the worst case scenario is we forget to factor in ourselves, right? Usually it would never get to that very worst scenario that you're imagining because you have the intelligence to stop it, to recognize like, oh, let me do something different and let me intervene. So when we're thinking of that worst case scenario, we don't factor ourselves in. So I want you to factor yourself in, and likely it would never get to that worst case scenario because you would have, put the brakes on it and turned it around way before that. But, problem solving, practicing mindfulness, these are all things that turn that negative thinking around or characterize healthier thinking rather than that negative thinking. Introducing self-compassion, right? I mentioned about what would a friend do? How can you talk to yourself with more compassion and kindness in a way that you would tell, or that the way you would talk to a loved one or a friend? This whole live is about the impact of negative self-talk. So let's talk about some of the consequences of always having these negative thoughts. One is, increased stress. Not only does stress trigger those negative thoughts, but it also creates more stress. It leads to chronic stress where you're constantly worrying about potential problems, catastrophizing outcomes, and dwelling on those negative events. It can have detrimental effects on your mental and physical health. The other day, I went to a training on inflammation, and super interesting. I wanted it to be more, I thought it was going to be more about like the effect of inflammation on our mental health, like on depression and anxiety, because I know that it definitely, influences it. But it was more just on like the general health, and not a lot of it, but quite a big portion of the training had to do with stress and how like that creates more inflammation. And that more inflammation creates more stress on your body, right? Like, so it's like that cycle. And same thing here. The stress can trigger your negative thoughts, but then it also can create that chronic stress, which creates havoc, right? Anxiety. Negative thinking is closely linked to anxiety disorders. Excessive worrying, anticipating negative outcomes, and irrational fears can contribute to heightened anxiety levels. So if you are struggling with anxiety, you definitely want to get a handle on your negative thinking. It can also lead to depression. Persistent feelings of hopelessness, low self-esteem, and a negative view of the future are hallmark symptoms of depression. So if you think that you have depression, then I advise you to get professional help, right? Go see a therapist, go do something, there's lots of modalities that can help, not just therapy, but of course I'm a therapist, so I'm going to recommend that. But there's lots of modalities that can help you overcome that depression. Low self-esteem, negative self-talk, self-criticism. I mean, imagine telling your child, the things that you're telling yourself in your mind, telling your child that, not, you guys aren't going to do that, but it can definitely erode the self-esteem of a child. How do you, like, it's definitely doing the same to you. And so when you're engaging in that negative thinking, it often results in having a poor self-image, self-esteem, lack of confidence in yourself. And then reduced resilience. It can impair your ability to bounce back from setbacks and challenges. It can lead to a sense of helplessness and an inability to cope effectively. I already mentioned, the stress that it causes on your body and it can affect your mental health, but it also can affect your physical health, right? Stress is linked to cardiovascular disease, high blood pressure, weakened immune system, and just getting sick more often. So it's good to get a handle and start managing those negative thoughts. And then finally, it can affect your relationships. You're constantly telling yourself, being critical and telling yourself these things, that you can't do it, that, you're not worthy, or, I'm all about like making time for yourself in this group. So if you're constantly telling yourself there's other things more important than me, whether you're consciously telling this or you're not, right? Like just the way you're spending your time, and, other people's time is more important than my time, and all of these things that you're telling yourself, right? It's going to affect your relationships because you're going to feel like you're less than. You can project your negative thoughts onto others, and it can definitely lead to conflicts and misunderstandings and just have this negative effect on your relationships. So again, all of these reasons are reasons why it's so important to get a handle and start managing your negative thoughts. So how can you, right? Like, we know how it's affecting us. It's affecting us physically, mentally, emotionally, our relationships, right? It has a profound effect, these negative thoughts. So I want to offer you some tips on how to reduce the negative thinking. One is just taking a step back. Okay, I know that your days are full, but doing some self check-ins to become more self-aware of your thoughts and your emotions and your behaviors. Taking that step back, whether you do some journaling, whether you just do some meditative, like just thinking, giving yourself that space. Start with 5 minutes, maybe before you go to sleep or in that early morning, and just, what am I feeling right now? Where is that feeling showing up? Where's that emotion showing up in my body, right? Like maybe you're feeling tense in your shoulders, or you're feeling heavy, or maybe you have like a bit of a headache. Like, I want you to get curious about what is going on in your body and in your mind and in your heart, right? Feelings aren't just felt in your heart, they're felt all over your body. And I want you to start noticing that. So becoming more self-aware. I'm going to give you a thought diary. This is something you can go ahead and I'll give you the diary. Just let me know in the comments if you want it. Actually, this is how it'll work. I'm like, how am I going to get this deal? Okay. Let me know. Just put the word diary in the comments, and I will message you and send you the thought diary, which is going to help you kind of get organized. What are you thinking? What are you feeling? How can we reframe that and introduce self-compassion and start, getting away from those negative thoughts? It's going to help you just start like noticing those mood shifts, because our thoughts are influencing the way you feel. And so when you start shifting the mood, when you start like feeling like a little bit like frustrated or irritated or angry, or like whatever that mood like shifts to, that is those moments that I want you to say, like, what was the thought, the negative thoughts that are fueling? A lot of times, a lot of our thoughts, our negative thoughts, are automatic. They're based on the beliefs that are totally ingrained in your mind. And so you tend to feel, but not realize that those thoughts are actually fueling or contributing to the way you feel. And so we want to create some distance between the situation and the feeling to be able to identify what is the thought that you're having, because then we can start shifting that thought. So this thought diary is going to help you do that. seeking supports from friends, family, therapists, right? Some professionals. My background is cognitive behavioral therapy, so that's exactly what we do. We look at the negative thoughts and the behaviors that are, that you're experiencing, so that we can start shifting them and changing them. And then that ultimately changes not just how you feel, but your whole life. And then actively going against those thoughts. So taking action that is contrary to what you're thinking. So you think like, I can't do this, right? I want you to take action to do it. Could be a small action, right? Get something that's going to get you out of that comfort zone. Practicing self-care when you don't feel like it, when you don't have it in you. I want you to, I've done other things, other Facebook Lives and podcast episodes about like motivation, like motivating yourself to do the thing that you want to do, but can't seem to get to do, right? Sometimes just doing something little, right? Like if you want to, let me think, you wanted to lose weight, right? Like you feel like that's it, but like this constant self-critical, like you'll never do it. And like what, is holding you back. And those self-doubts start coming, right? I want you to put your sneakers on. To put your sneakers on and walk out the door. Like do something that's going to be contrary to what your thoughts are and what their self-doubts, like prove yourself wrong. But depends on what you want to do. I want you to just take action against it and practice self-care. Do something for yourself, because you are 100% responsible for your own life and your own happiness. And just because you are your own worst critic doesn't mean that you cannot also be your own best cheerleader. So let's make that change. If you have any questions about this or you're struggling with this, let me know in the comments or send me a DM. Let's talk about this, because it is so important to start managing those negative thoughts that you're having so that you can play bigger, you can live bigger, right? I wanted to mention the Stress Less Supermom Masterclass that I'm having on October 5th. If you're interested in that, momswithoutcapes.com/masterclass. It is going to be all about how to manage and reduce the stress in your life. I'm going to bring in quite a bit of information. It's going to be a lot of information, but it's also going to be specific action steps that we're going to work together to come up with. It's very interactive, this masterclass. Last time I did it, it's in a Zoom call. You get, it's very interactive. Don't think it's going to be me on a webinar just talking and talking and talking. It's not. So sign up for that. I think the cost is $47 or $49. I forget, but it's going to be worth every penny and then more. So if you have any questions about that, let me know that. But then also, if you have any questions about this negative thinking, let me know what are your thoughts, right? Like what needs to be challenged and how can you introduce self-compassion into them? All right, that's it. I hope that you all have a great Thursday or a great week, and I will see you in the group.